Little girl sings with a sign, "One to heal my mum." The single billionaire stops and, when he sees her necklace, freezes. The icy November wind sliced through the streets of Chicago like a blade. Nolan Carter adjusted his Italian wool coat and descended the steps of the corporate building where he had just closed another million-dollar deal. At 32, he had everything money could buy, except a real reason to smile. 16 hours of work a day, meetings extending into the early morning hours, decisions involving millions of dollars. His life was a well-oiled machine of commitments and achievements. Yet there was something empty in every victory. He was walking toward the black Bentley when something caught his eye. A small figure on the corner, motionless like a statue amid the constant movement of the city. A child holding a sign. Nolan almost walked right past. Chicago was full of people asking for money, and he had learned long ago not to get involved. His assistant always said, "You can help better through organized donations, Mr. Carter." It was more efficient, cleaner, more distant. But there was something different about that scene. Perhaps the girl's posture, the way she just stood there, quiet, simply waiting. Without shouting, without begging, without making a fuss. Just a little child holding a piece of cardboard, like it was the most important thing in the world. Curiosity won out over indifference. He approached and saw a tiny girl, maybe 5 years old, standing there with a sign in her hands. Her coat was too big, probably an older sibling's or purchased at a thrift store with room to grow. The sleeves covered her small hands, leaving only her fingertips visible. Her brown hair fell over her shoulders like messy curtains blown by the November wind. An old coffee can lay at her feet, with a few coins and a single dollar bill at the bottom. Nolan was able to read the sign when he got closer. $1 to heal my mum." The words were written in clumsy handwriting, some letters crooked, others too small for the space. The blue ink had smeared a bit in the last rain, but the message was clear, direct, desperate. The girl looked at him with big, hopeful eyes, but said nothing. She didn't make that sad puppy face so many kids did when they saw his expensive clothes. She just gripped the sign more firmly, as if those words were her only defense against a world too big for her. There was something about the dignity in that posture that touched Nolan in a way he hadn't expected. "Hi," he said gently, kneeling down so he was at her eye level. That's when he saw it. Hanging from the delicate neck of the girl, slipping out from under her oversized coat, was a necklace. Simple, delicate. A small amber stone with something carved inside. A star. The world stopped. Nolan froze completely, still kneeling on the cold sidewalk, as if someone had shut down all his systems at once. The city's noise, cars, horns, people talking, turned into a distant hum. The passers-by disappeared. Even the biting wind seemed to pause. He knew that necklace. He knew every detail. Every tiny scratch on the amber stone, every curve of the gold chain, the way light refracted through the stone when the sun hit it at just the right angle, because he had made it himself. The memory hit him like a speeding train. 18 years old, the last week of August before leaving for Stanford, the summer heat giving way to the first chill of fall. A girl with curly hair sitting on the bridge over the river, her legs dangling above the water. "I don't want you to go, Nolan. I don't want to go either, but Stanford. It's everything I've ever wanted. What about me? What am I supposed to do without my best friend?" He had held her hand, feeling how small and cold it was. "You'll be fine. You're the strongest person I know." "I don't feel strong." Then he had taken the necklace out of his pocket, the amber stone he had found on the beach during their last vacation together in Michigan, the star he had carved with his father's help, working in the garage for weeks until it was perfect, the gold chain he had bought with the money he saved, washing cars all summer. "I made this for you," he had said, carefully placing the necklace around her neck. "So you'll never forget there's someone in this world who truly cares about you." She had touched the stone, tears filling her eyes. "I'll never forget you, Nolan, never." "Me neither. And when I graduate, when I have a good job, I'll come back for you." But life wasn't so simple. Stanford led to other places, other opportunities, Calls became less frequent. Letters stopped coming, and before he realized it, 5 years had turned into 10, and 10 turned into 14, and Nora had become a precious but distant memory. "Mister," the girl's voice cut through his paralysis like a knife. "Are you okay?" Nolan blinked, realizing he was staring at the necklace intensely. His hands trembled slightly. The child looked at him with genuine concern, her head tilted to the side the way kids do when trying to understand something. He tried to speak, but his voice came out hoarse. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Sorry, it's just that necklace is very beautiful." The girl touched the amber stone with an instinctive tenderness, the way people handle precious things. "Thank you. It was my mom's when she was young." Nolan's heart did a somersault in his chest. "Was it?" "She said she got it from someone very special," the girl went on, unaware that her words were destroying and rebuilding the man kneeling before her, someone who really cared about her. Nolan felt his legs go weak. Even kneeling, he had to steady himself with one hand on the ground so he wouldn't fall. What's your name?" he managed to ask, though his voice sounded strange in his own ears. "Maisie," she replied, smiling for the first time, a small but genuine smile. "And your mom?" Nolan asked, desperate to confirm what he already knew in his heart. "What's her name?" "Nora," Maisie said simply. "Nora." The name echoed in Nolan's mind like a gong. 14 years apart, silent lives lived separately, and now here was her daughter, wearing the necklace he had carved with his own hands. "Nora," he repeated, almost in a whisper. "Do you know my mom?" Maisie asked, her eyes lighting up with hope. No was too small a word for what Nora had meant to him. She had been his confidant, his partner in crime, his anchor during the turbulent teenage years. She was the person who understood him when he didn't understand himself. "Yes," he finally said. "I knew her, a long time ago." "She's sick," Maisie said, the joy of the previous moment fading into worry. "Really sick. She's had a fever for days and can't get out of bed. I tried to take care of her, but I don't know what to do." The reality of the situation hit Nolan like a punch. While he'd been building his empire on the other side of the country, Nora was here, sick, relying on a 5-year-old child to find help. "Is that why you're here?" he asked, looking at the sign. Maisie nodded, serious. "She always says we don't have money for a doctor, but I thought if I collected enough, maybe it would help." Nolan felt his chest tighten, a 5-year-old child on the street, trying to gather money to save her mother. And he complained that his life felt empty. "Maisie," he said, taking his wallet out of his pocket. "How old are you?" 5. "I'll be 6 in December." 5 years old, the same age he'd been when he met Nora in school, when she stood up for him against the bigger boys who teased him about his glasses and books. He pulled out all the bills in his wallet, several 20s, a few 50s, and 100. "This should help," he said, placing the money in the can. Maisie's eyes widened. "That's a lot of money," she whispered. "A whole lot." "It's not enough," Nolan said, standing up. "Your mom needs a real doctor, right now." "But she said we can't afford it." "She doesn't have to pay," Nolan interrupted gently. "I'll pay." Maisie looked at him with suspicion for the first time. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you want to help?" It was a fair question. A 5-year-old who had learned to be wary of strangers, even strangers who offered help. Nolan looked at the necklace again, then into the girl's eyes. There was something familiar in them, too. The shape, the color, like seeing a miniature version of Nora. "Because I'm the friend who gave that necklace to your mom," he said simply. Maisie's eyes went wide as saucers. "You're Nolan?" Hearing his name in her voice, with that mix of surprise and recognition, made his heart race. Nora had spoken about him. After all these years, she still remembered. "She talks about me." "Sometimes," Maisie said, touching the necklace again. "When she's really sad or really sick, she holds the necklace and says your name. She says you were the kindest person in the world." Nolan felt his eyes sting. "Kind. After years of building a reputation as a ruthless businessman, closing deals without looking left or right, being remembered as kind seemed impossible. But Nora had kept the necklace all these years, and she'd told her daughter about him. "Maisie," he said, trying to keep the urgency out of his voice, "where do you live? I need to see your mom." The child hesitated for a moment, caution returning. "She always says not to tell strangers where we live." "But I'm not a stranger," Nolan said gently. "I'm Nolan, the friend who made that necklace." Maisie studied him for a long moment, as if making a very important decision. "Are you really going to help?" she finally asked. "You're not going to leave when it gets hard?" The question cut deep. There was an old pain in those words, an experience no child should have. Someone had abandoned this girl before, probably more than once. "I left once," Nolan admitted, "and I've regretted it every day since. I'm not going to do that again." Maisie nodded slowly, as though she saw something in his eyes that convinced her. "Okay, but you have to promise you won't leave us." "I promise," Nolan said, and for the first time in years, he said something that came straight from the heart. Maisie carefully put away the can and the sign, folded the cardboard, and placed everything in a plastic bag she pulled from her coat pocket. Nolan quickly texted his driver, cancelling his afternoon meeting, then his assistant, cancelling everything else for the day. For the first time in his adult life, something was more important than work. They walked through streets Nolan didn't know, far from the upscale neighborhoods of Glass Tower and Lincoln Park where he lived. The houses got smaller, closer together, clothes hung on fire escapes. Older cars were parked on the street, some with dents that would never be fixed. With each step, Nolan felt the weight of the lost years. Nora had stayed here, in this part of town he never visited, raising a daughter on her own while he was amassing his fortune across the country. "It's right there," Maisie pointed to a 3-story brick building with peeling paint around the window edges. "Third floor." They climbed the creaking wooden stairs. The railing was worn down by decades of residence. In the narrow hallway, it smelled of home cooking and cleaning products. Maisie stopped at a door painted in faded blue with the number 3B in peeling gold letters. "Mom?" she called, knocking softly. "I'm back, and I brought someone." Silence. Maisie pulled a key from inside her coat and opened the door. "She lets me have a key for emergencies," she explained to Nolan. The apartment was small but clean. Simple furniture but well taken care of. A brown sofa with a few patches, a coffee table with scratches, a bookshelf with books and photos. Some plants on the window tried to catch the weak afternoon sun. Childish drawings were stuck to the fridge with colorful magnets. It smelled like chicken soup and cold medicine. And there, on the living room sofa, was Nora. 14 years dissolved like morning fog. She was thinner than in his memory, her hair shorter, a few lines around her eyes that hadn't been there when they were teenagers. But it was her. The shape of her face, the curve of her lips, the way her brow furrowed even in sleep. His Nora. She was pale, feverish, wrapped in a grey wool blanket that had seen better days. She breathed with difficulty, as if each breath was an effort. There was a half-full glass of water on the side table, along with a few medicine bottles. "Mom," Maisie approached and gently touched her mother's shoulder. "Look who I found." Nora opened her eyes slowly, as if coming out of a heavy, feverish sleep. At first they were unfocused, then she blinked several times, trying to see clearly. When her eyes met Nolan's, she went completely still. For a moment that felt like forever. They just looked at each other. Recognition came gradually, like water filling an empty vessel. "Nolan?" Her voice was a whisper, almost inaudible, as if she feared he might be a fever dream. He stepped closer, his heart pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Hi, Nora." And the reunion happened without words, but filled with memory. The little apartment fell silent as Nora stared at Nolan, as if trying to process that he was truly there. In her living room, after all these years, her feverish eyes reflected a mixture of surprise and disbelief. "Nolan, "Is it really you?" she whispered, her voice weak. She lifted her trembling hand, almost touching his face, but stopped halfway, unsure. He took that hand in the air and squeezed it gently. "It's me, Nora." A tear slid down her face. She tried to sit up, but trembled with the effort. Nolan realized how hot her skin was, burning with fever. "How did you—" she began, but a cough interrupted her question. "I found Maisie on the street," Nolan explained, glancing at the child who was watching everything with alert eyes. "She was trying to raise money for you." Nora's face shifted to worry. "Maisie, I told you not to go out alone," she scolded weakly. "Sorry, Mum," the girl answered, gripping the edge of her oversized coat. "But you've been sick for days. And we ran out of medicine." Nora closed her eyes for a moment, as if the dim apartment light was too bright. "I was going to get better. It's just a cold." Nolan touched her forehead and felt how high the fever was. "This is not just a cold, Nora. How long have you been like this?" She looked away. "A week. Maybe a bit more." "A week and 3 days," Maisie corrected, with the precision only children have. "First it was just a cough. Then she got really hot and couldn't go to work anymore." Nolan noticed the crumpled papers on the coffee table. Bills for electricity, water, rent, some with red warnings. "You're not well," he said firmly. "I'm taking you to the hospital right now." "No need," Nora protested, trying to appear stronger than she was. "I don't have insurance. I can't pay for that." "I can," Nolan replied simply. Nora shook her head. "I don't want your charity, Nolan." "It's not charity," he said, his voice gentle but decisive. "It's what you do for people who matter." She stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to read something in his eyes. Nolan held her gaze. "Please, Nora, let me help." Maisie approached her mother and held her hand. "Please, Mom, I'm scared." Those simple words seemed to break something inside Nora. She looked at her daughter, then at Nolan, and nodded slightly. "All right." Nolan didn't waste time. He called his personal physician, Dr. Bennett, asking him to prepare everything at Northwestern Memorial. While talking on the phone, he saw Maisie packing a few items into a small backpack: her toothbrush, a worn children's book, a little stuffed bunny that had seen better days. "The ambulance will take too long," he said after hanging up. "I'll drive you in my car." "You have a car?" Maisie asked, surprised. "I do," he answered, admitting that it was a Bentley worth nearly $500,000 parked 2 blocks away. Nolan went over to the sofa. Without a word, he slipped an arm under Nora's knees and another around her back. "What are you—" she began, but he was already lifting her. She was so light it frightened him. Nora, who had always been slender, now seemed far too fragile. "Can you walk?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "I think so," she replied. But when she tried to stand, her legs wobbled. Without hesitation, Nolan scooped her into his arms. She was almost like a child against his chest, small, feverishly hot, vulnerable in a way that broke his heart. "Nolan, this isn't necessary," she protested weakly, but her body said otherwise, relaxing against him as if she had no strength left. "Yes, it is," he replied simply. Maisie grabbed the house keys and the backpack she had prepared. Her eyes never left her mother, worry evident in every move. They made their way down the creaking stairs slowly. With each step, Nolan felt the heat of Nora's fever against his chest. She kept her eyes closed, breathing irregularly. On the 3rd landing, she whispered something. "What did you say?" Nolan asked, leaning his head closer to hear. "You got strong," she repeated, a small smile on her feverish lips. "And you're still as light as always," he replied, smiling too. It was a strange moment, almost out of place, a fragment of normalcy in such a grave situation. As if, for an instant, the 14 years of separation were reduced. When they reached the street, Nolan's driver was already waiting with the black Bentley. The man opened the door without comment about his boss carrying a sick woman or a small child, in worn clothes, following them. Northwestern Memorial, Nolan instructed, as he slid into the back seat with Nora still in his arms. As quickly as possible, Maisie climbed in after him, her eyes widening at the luxurious interior of the car. "Is this your car?" she asked, timidly touching the soft leather of the seat. "It's my work car," Nolan replied, adjusting Nora so she was more comfortable, her head resting on his shoulder. During the ride, Maisie remained silent, watching the buildings flash by through the window. Occasionally, she looked at her mother, as if she needed to check she was still there. Nora drifted in and out of consciousness. Once, she opened her eyes and looked directly at Nolan. "You came back," she murmured. He wasn't sure if she was lucid or delirious with fever, but he answered anyway. "I came back." They arrived at the hospital in record time. Dr. Bennett was already waiting at the entrance with a team and a gurney. When Nolan got out carrying Nora, the doctor frowned at the state she was in. "How long has she had a fever?" he asked as Nolan placed her on the gurney. "A week and 3 days," Maisie answered, her voice small but precise. The doctor looked at the child, surprised, then nodded. "We'll take care of your mom, okay?" "Are you going to give her a shot?" Maisie asked, clutching Nolan's hand. "Maybe," Dr. Bennett answered honestly, "but only if necessary, to help her get better." Maisie nodded solemnly, as if giving permission. The team began wheeling Nora inside. Her eyes searched for Maisie. "My daughter." "She'll stay with me," Nolan assured her. "We'll be right here when you're done with the tests." Nora hesitated, then slightly nodded before being taken through the double doors. Nolan and Maisie stayed by the entrance, watching until the gurney disappeared from view. "Where are they taking her?" Maisie asked, her voice betraying her fear for the first time. "They're going to do some tests," Nolan explained, still holding the child's small hand, "to figure out why she's sick. And then they'll give her the right medicine so she can get better." A nurse approached them. "Mr. Carter, can you follow me to a private waiting room?" Nolan nodded, and they followed the woman down quiet corridors to a small but comfortable room with leather sofas and a TV on the wall. A tray with water and coffee stood on a side table. "Dr. Bennett will come as soon as he has news," the nurse said before leaving. Maisie climbed onto one of the sofas, her short legs swinging in the air because they didn't reach the floor. She looked around with obvious curiosity, but Nolan noticed how her small fingers kept fiddling with the hem of her coat, a sign of anxiety. "Are you hungry?" he asked, realizing she probably hadn't eaten for hours. She shrugged. "A little." Nolan picked up the phone and made a quick order from the hospital's restaurant. Minutes later, an attendant brought a tray with sandwiches, fruit, and a glass of milk. Maisie ate slowly, her eyes constantly returning to the door, as if expecting her mom to appear at any moment. Time passed slowly, an hour, then 2. Nolan answered messages on his phone occasionally, but his mind was elsewhere. Part of him was still processing the shock of reuniting with Nora after so many years, another part worried about her health. "How long will it take?" Maisie finally asked, breaking the silence. "I'm not sure," Nolan answered honestly. "The doctors need to do a lot of tests to figure out what's going on with your mom." The girl nodded, absorbing the information. Then, after a moment, she asked the question clearly weighing on her heart. "Is she going to die?" The directness of the question caught Nolan off guard. It was too blunt, too raw, coming from someone so little. But Maisie's eyes showed she didn't want comforting lies. She wanted the truth. Nolan knelt in front of her, getting on her level. "No," he said firmly. "We're here for her now." Maisie studied him for a moment, as if gauging the truth in his words. "Promise?" "I promise," he answered, holding her small hands in his. "The doctors here are the best in the city, and we're not going to leave your mom alone." Something in the girl's eyes changed, a small relaxation, as if a weight had been lifted from her two young shoulders. "Okay," she said simply, and there in the quiet of that sterile waiting room, the first bond of trust formed between them. Not with big declarations, not with elaborate promises, just simple words, and a silent belief that maybe she didn't have to face everything alone anymore. Maisie took her stuffed bunny from her backpack and hugged it against her chest. The toy was worn, with one ear mended and the stuffing compressed from too much love. "This is Mr. Hop," she said, holding the bunny so Nolan could see. "Mom made him for me when I was a baby." Nolan smiled. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Hop." "He takes care of me when Mom's working," Maisie explained, stroking the bunny's head. "Now he's going to take care of her too." The simplicity of that childlike faith touched Nolan in a way he hadn't expected. Nearly 3 hours later, Dr. Bennett finally entered the room. His face was serious, but not grim. Nolan and Maisie stood up simultaneously. "How is she?" Nolan asked. The doctor took a deep breath. "We ran several tests. The situation is serious but not critical. She's stable now and the fever has come down with the antipyretics." "What does she have?" Nolan pressed. "Preliminary results indicate lupus," the doctor answered. "What's that?" asked Maisie, clutching Mr. Hop tighter. Dr. Bennett knelt down to speak to her. "It's a disease where the body gets confused and starts fighting against itself instead of just fighting germs. But we have medicines that help the body stop doing that." Maisie frowned, processing the information. "Is it like when I argue with myself in my head?" The doctor smiled. "A little bit like that, yes." Nolan stepped away with the doctor to speak more privately. "How serious is it?" "It's a chronic condition," Dr. Bennett explained. "There's no cure, but it's treatable. She'll need continuous medication, regular checkups, and possibly some hospital stays if there are flare-ups. But with proper treatment, she can live almost a normal life." "And without treatment?" The doctor pressed his lips together. "Without treatment, lupus can affect vital organs, kidneys, heart, lungs. It's a disease that doesn't forgive neglect." Nolan nodded, absorbing this information. "Will she need to be admitted?" "I recommend at least 3 days to fully stabilize her and start treatment. Then she can continue at home with follow-up care." "Do the best you can," Nolan said. "Cost is not a problem." The doctor nodded, glancing briefly at Maisie, still hugging her stuffed bunny. "Ms. Lane told me she doesn't have health insurance. I'll take care of it. I want her to get the best possible treatment." "Understood. We've already started the treatment protocol. She's responding well, but she's still very weak. She'll need rest and care." "Can we see her?" Nolan asked. "Yes, but only for a short time. She needs to rest." Maisie approached, tugging on Nolan's sleeve. "Is Mom okay now?" Nolan looked at her and answered honestly, "She's better. But she'll need medicine for a long time to really get well." "And who's going to pay?" Maisie asked with the practical worry no child should have. "Mom always says medicine is expensive." Nolan knelt again in front of her. "I'll pay, Maisie. Your mom doesn't have to worry about that." The girl studied him with serious eyes, as though trying to understand something beyond his words. "You're going to take care of us?" she finally asked, her voice small but direct. The question hung in the air between them. It was more than a simple inquiry. It was a test, a plea, a hope. Nolan thought about his life before that day. The empty, silent apartment, the endless meetings, the accomplishments that brought no real satisfaction. And now, suddenly, Nora was back in his life. And Maisie, this brave child who wasn't afraid to ask the important questions. "Yes," he replied, with a certainty that surprised him. "And I'm not leaving." Maisie kept looking at him for a long moment, as though seeing through his words, right to his heart. Then she finally nodded. "Okay," she said, and held out Mr. Hop to him. "He can stay with you a bit if you want." It was an offer Nolan understood completely. It wasn't just a worn-out stuffed rabbit. It was trust. It was acceptance. It was the most precious treasure that child could offer. Gently, he took the toy. "I'll take good care of him," he promised. In that moment, Nolan knew his life had changed forever. And for the first time in years, he felt he was exactly where he needed to be. The nurse adjusted the pillow beneath Nora's head for the 3rd time, checked her IV, and smiled at Maisie. "Your mom needs to rest now. You can come back tomorrow morning." Maisie held her mom's hand, reluctant to let go. "Can't I stay here with her?" The nurse shook her head kindly. Hospital rules don't allow children to stay overnight, sweetheart. But your mom will be sleeping most of the time with the medication. Nora, though her eyes were heavy from medication, tried to smile at her daughter. I'll be okay, Maisie. You'll go with Nolan, and tomorrow you can come back, all right? Promise you won't leave, Maisie whispered. I promise. Nora squeezed her daughter's hand. I'm just going to rest so I can get strong again. Nolan, watching the scene from the doorway, felt a pang in his chest. That was a promise Maisie had likely heard before and seen broken. The child's eyes carried a concern no 5-year-old should know. We'll be here first thing tomorrow, he assured, moving closer to the bed. And if anything happens, the doctors have my number. Nora nodded, fighting the sleep the medication brought. Thank you, Nolan, she murmured, her eyes already closing. Maisie kissed her mother's cheek, whispered something in her ear that made Nora smile, even with her eyes closed, and finally let Nolan guide her out of the room. In the corridor, the girl walked silently, still clutching Mr. Hop tightly to her chest. Her steps were small and slow, as if each one took her farther from her mom than she'd like. Do you want something to eat before we go? Nolan asked as they reached the hospital lobby. Maisie shook her head. I'm not hungry. Are you tired? She shrugged, a gesture that seemed to say a lot of things at once. A little. Nolan called his driver as he thought about what to do next. 3 days, the doctor had said. 3 days of hospitalization for Nora. Where would Maisie stay? She couldn't go back to the apartment alone. A 5-year-old child by herself was unthinkable. The solution was obvious, but it still made him nervous. His home wasn't a place for children. It had never been. Maisie, he said, crouching down to look her in the eyes. Your mum is going to be in the hospital for a few days. Would you like to stay at my place until she gets better? The girl's eyes studied him seriously. Can't I stay at our house? You're too little to stay alone, Nolan explained gently. Sometimes I stay alone when Mom works late, she argued. Nolan frowned. The thought of a 5-year-old alone at home, even for a few hours, deeply bothered him. Even so, it's best if you stay with me now. We can stop by your house to grab some clothes and toys. Maisie thought for a moment, then nodded. Okay, but Mr. Hop is coming too. Of course. Mr. Hop is more than welcome. The driver arrived, and they quickly stopped by Nora and Maisie's apartment. The girl headed straight to her room, filling a small purple backpack with a few outfits, a storybook, a toothbrush with cartoon characters, and a little box she didn't show Nolan. On the way to Nolan's apartment, Maisie was quiet, looking out at the city lights that began to glow as evening fell. Is your house far? She finally asked. Not too far, Nolan replied. It's in a building called Glass Tower. Is it made of glass for real? Most of it, yes. Can you see everything from up there? Almost everything. The whole city. Her eyes widened a little. So you live in the sky? The question caught him off guard, and he smiled. Something like that. The car entered the underground garage of the imposing 68-story building that dominated Chicago's skyline. Glass and steel reached for the sky, reflecting the city lights like a giant mirror. Whoa, Maisie whispered as they entered the private elevator that went straight to the penthouse. The digital panel recognized Nolan's fingerprint, and the elevator rose silently. The numbers flashed quickly. 20, 30, 40. Do you live on the very top? Maisie asked, watching the floors go by. In the penthouse, Nolan confirmed. Floor 68. What's a penthouse? It's what we call the apartment at the top of the building. Is it like being king of the mountain? She asked, recalling some childhood game. Nolan smiled. Something like that. The elevator reached the top with a soft ding, and the doors opened directly into the entry hall of the apartment. Automatic lights turned on gently, revealing a huge, impeccably decorated space. Maisie took a hesitant step out of the elevator, her eyes roaming everywhere with wonder. The ceiling was high, and most of the walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic view of Chicago at night. The decor was minimalist and elegant. Shades of gray, white, and black dominated, with a few dark wood pieces for contrast. "Is this a house?" she asked in almost a whisper. Nolan took in his own space through her eyes and suddenly saw something different. There were no bright colors, no signs of everyday life, no warmth of a lived-in home. Everything was perfect, immaculate, and completely lifeless. "It's where I live," he answered, realizing he hadn't said, "It's my home." Maisie took a few cautious steps, as if afraid to touch something and break it. "It's so big and clean." She walked slowly, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. She looked at the grey leather couches without daring to sit, at the glass dining table without touching it, at the modern art pieces without understanding. "Do you live here alone?" she asked, still walking in slow circles, taking it all in. "Yes." "Aren't you scared?" The question surprised him. "Scared? Why?" She shrugged, a gesture that seemed bigger than her. "It's a lot of space for just one person. It must echo." Nolan had never thought of that, but now, seeing his home through her eyes, he realized how empty it was. Not just spacious, truly empty, like someone had designed the concept of a house without understanding what actually makes a place a home. "You must be hungry," he said, changing the subject. "So let's see what we have in the kitchen." The kitchen was equally immaculate. White marble countertops, stainless steel appliances, a huge central island. Nolan opened the fridge and found exactly what he expected. Almost nothing. A few yogurts, an expensive bottle of wine, mineral water, and some fruit. "I usually order takeout," he explained, feeling oddly embarrassed. "Mom always cooks," Maisie said, finally daring to climb onto one of the high stools around the kitchen island. "Even when she's tired." Nolan took out his phone. "What do you like to eat?" "Pizza." That was easy. He placed a quick order, a small cheese pizza for Maisie, a margarita for him. "Let's find you a room while we wait for the food," he suggested. The apartment had 4 suites, all equally impersonal. Nolan took Maisie to the one closest to the master bedroom. "You can stay here," he said, turning on the lights. It was a spacious room with a queen-size bed, grey Egyptian cotton sheets, 2 minimalist nightstands, and a wall-mounted TV. The automatic curtains were open, revealing the city below, a vast tapestry of lights. Maisie looked around, then at the bed that was far too big. "Can I sleep with the light on?" she asked quietly. "Sure," Nolan answered. "I'll leave the lamp on for you." "What if I need to go to the bathroom at night?" "The bathroom is that door right there," he pointed. "But if you need help, you can call me." "My room is right down the hall," he said, indicating the door at the end. Maisie nodded, but didn't look entirely convinced. She walked to the window and looked down at the city so far below. "It's really high," she commented. "Are we in the clouds?" "Almost," Nolan replied, standing beside her. "On cloudy days, sometimes the clouds pass right at window level." Her eyes widened. "Really, really, it's beautiful to see." They stood there for a moment, side by side, looking out at the city. Maisie so small beside him, holding Mr. Hop in one hand and pressing the other against the glass. The doorbell rang, indicating the food had arrived. They ate at the oversized dining table. Maisie perched on cushions to reach properly. She ate quietly, her eyes still taking in everything around her. "Your house is pretty," she finally said, "but it's really quiet." Nolan looked around, noticing again the absolute silence of the place. There was no hum of an old refrigerator, no noise from neighbors, no distant sound of cars. The penthouse was soundproofed, isolated from the world outside. "Yes, it is," he agreed, "very quiet." After eating, Nolan showed Maisie how the guest bathroom shower worked, set aside a clean towel, and let her bathe on her own with the door slightly ajar in case she needed help. While the girl got ready for bed, he wandered through the apartment, seeing it with new eyes. The expensive, perfectly placed furniture, the decorator-selected artwork, the stunning view he rarely stopped to appreciate. It was a showcase of success, not a home. In the guest room, he helped Maisie settle into the oversized bed. She looked tiny there, nestled among the goose-down pillows, hugging Mr. Hop. "All good?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. She nodded, but her eyes were restless. "When's Mom going to get better?" "The doctors are taking care of her. In a few days, she'll be able to leave the hospital. And then? Then she'll need to rest and take medicine." "Will she be able to work?" Practical worries again. A 5-year-old child concerned about bills, work, survival. "Don't worry about that now," Nolan said softly. "I promised I'd take care of you both, remember?" She nodded slowly. "Did you know Mom for a long time?" "Since we were kids, a little older than you." "Were you friends?" "Best friends." Maisie thought for a moment, processing this information. "Why did you stop being friends?" The question hit Nolan like a punch. Direct, simple, no accusation, just genuine curiosity. "I moved away, far away." "For college, couldn't you visit?" "I should have visited," he admitted. "It was a mistake not to." She accepted the answer without judgment, simply nodding as if she now understood a mystery. "Good night, Maisie," he said, standing up. "Good night, Nolan." He left the lamp on as promised and slipped out, leaving the door partially open. A few hours later, while working on his laptop in the living room, Nolan went to the kitchen for a glass of water. Passing by the hallway, he noticed Maisie was still awake, her eyes open in the dimly lit room, staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly from the doorway. She shook her head. "It's too quiet." Nolan stepped in and sat on the bed again. "Is there more noise in your apartment?" "Yeah, there are cars outside, and the upstairs neighbor who walks around at night, and Mrs. Peter's dog that barks at people passing by." She paused. "Here, there's only silence." It was true. The soundproofing in the penthouse was perfect. No city noise penetrated, no sign of other lives beyond the walls. "Do you want me to turn on the TV quietly?" he offered. "No, just to stay here for a bit." He nodded and leaned back against the headboard. Maisie settled in, still hugging Mr. Hop, seeming more at ease with him there. "Mom always says I'm brave," she commented after a while, "but sometimes I get scared." "That's normal," Nolan replied. "Everybody gets scared sometimes. Even you. Even me." "What are you scared of?" Nolan thought for a moment. How could he explain to a child that his biggest fear was exactly this? A whole life built around empty achievements, a perfect but cold apartment, days that passed without real meaning. "I'm afraid of being alone," he finally said, surprised by his own honesty. Maisie considered that for a moment. "But you live alone." "Yes, and sometimes it's very lonely." "Why don't you get a dog or a cat?" "I never thought of that," he admitted. "I work a lot." "Mom works a lot too," Maisie said, her voice heavy with drowsiness. "But she always says you need someone to come home to?" Nolan felt a tightening in his chest. The simple wisdom of a child repeating her mother's words, someone to come home to. He had built an empire, yet had no one waiting for him when he got back. "Your mom is very smart," he said quietly. "She's the smartest person in the world," Maisie murmured, her eyes beginning to close. "But sometimes she cries when she thinks I'm asleep." Nolan stayed there, sitting on the edge of that huge bed, watching Maisie finally drift off. The lamp cast a soft glow on her small face, so much like Nora's when they were kids. The same eyebrows, the same shape of nose. But there was something else there, a quiet strength, a resilience that came from growing up with hardships he had never known. Once he was sure she was deeply asleep, he rose carefully so as not to wake her. Back in the living room, Nolan walked over to one of the enormous windows and looked down at the city below. Lights everywhere, people living their lives, stories unfolding in every lit window he could see. And up here at the top of the world, his perfect, empty apartment. A trophy, not a home. Nolan went to his office, a sleek room with carefully organized books he rarely read, and an imposing desk. He opened a drawer and removed a false bottom. There, hidden for years, was a framed photograph. 2 smiling 12-year-old faces, a girl with curly hair and a boy with glasses too big for his face. Both sitting at the edge of a lake, legs dangling in the water, fingers intertwined. A perfect moment captured forever. Nolan and Nora, before the world separated them. He ran his fingers over the image, feeling the weight of the lost years, the choices made, the paths not taken. The apartment around him, 850 square feet of silent luxury, suddenly felt exactly like what it was. Wealth without love, just a beautiful emptiness. Maisie had been right. The house didn't know how to laugh. It had never learned. But maybe, Nolan thought as he placed the photo on his desk, it still could. 3 days blurred by in a haze of hospital corridors, conversations with doctors, and nights during which Maisie finally managed to sleep in the silent apartment. Nolan rearranged his schedule, cancelled meetings, delegated decisions for the first time in years. He placed something above work. And now, finally, Nora was home. Not at Nolan's penthouse, but in the small apartment where she and Maisie lived. He had insisted they stay with him, arguing that his place was better for her recovery, but Nora stood firm. "I need my own place," she said simply. "My own smells, my own things." So there they were, the three of them. Nora reclining on the living room couch with a blanket over her legs, paler than she should be, but fever-free at last. Maisie sitting on the rug drawing, checking on her mom every few minutes, as if she needed to confirm she was really there. And Nolan in the small kitchen making tea, feeling strangely out of place among the simple appliances and pots with signs of frequent use. "With sugar?" he asked, raising his voice so Nora could hear from the living room. "Just a little," she replied. "The doctor said to cut back." Nolan found the sugar bowl, an old piece of hand-painted ceramic, obviously well-loved. He put only half a spoonful in her cup and brought the tea to Nora. "Thank you," she said, accepting the warm drink. Her fingers brushed his during the handoff, a brief touch that seemed to carry more meaning than it should. Maisie looked at the two of them, then went back to her drawing, a small smile on her lips. "What are you drawing?" Nolan asked, sitting down in the armchair next to the couch. "Our family," Maisie replied without looking up from the paper. "Me, Mom, and you?" Nora almost choked on her tea, and Nolan felt something strange in his chest, like his heart stumbled for a moment. "Maisie, Nolan is a friend who's helping us," Nora explained gently. "He has his own life, his own job." "But he said he was going to take care of us," Maisie insisted, still focused on her drawing, adding details with colored pencils. "And he said he wouldn't leave." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. It wasn't empty like the silence in Nolan's penthouse, but full, heavy with unspoken words, with promises made in desperate moments, with hopes no adult dared to name. "Why don't you go show Mr. Hop the new drawing?" Nora suggested. "He was waiting for you in your room." Maisie seemed to understand the cue. She gathered her pencils, picked up the unfinished drawing, and left the room, not without casting a meaningful glance at the two adults. When the bedroom door closed, Nora sighed. "I'm sorry about that," she said, placing her cup on the coffee table. "She gets attached quickly." "No need to apologize," Nolan replied. "I did say I'd take care of you both, and I intend to keep my word." Nora looked at him intently, as if trying to solve a particularly difficult puzzle. "Why? Why? Why are you doing all this?" she asked. "Paying for doctors, medication, looking after Maisie. You have a life, Nolan, a company to run. Why are you here, taking care of us?" The question hovered between them. Nolan could have answered in many ways. He could say it was for an old friendship, for the unexpected reunion, for doing what was right. But none of those felt sufficient. "Because when I saw you on that couch with a fever, I realized how much time I've lost," he finally said. "How much I wasted chasing things that don't really matter." Nora looked away, her fingers playing with the fringe of the blanket covering her legs. "A lot has happened, Nolan. We're not those kids at the lake anymore." "I know. You don't owe me anything. It's not about owing." She took a deep breath as if gathering courage for something difficult. "Do you want to know what happened after you left? After the letters stopped? After the phone calls became less frequent and then stopped altogether. Nolan nodded, feeling the weight of what was coming. I got pregnant at 19, she began, her voice low but firm. Maisie's father was a musician, handsome, charismatic, full of promises for the future. He vanished when I told him I was pregnant, just took his guitar and never came back. She paused, taking a sip of tea before continuing. My parents had already moved to Florida. When they found out, they said I made my choice, that I had to deal with the consequences. Nora, no, let me finish, she interrupted. You want to know why I'm here, in this tiny apartment, working 2 jobs to pay the bills, why I let the fever get so high before looking for help? Because that's been my life these past years, Nolan. Hard choices, impossible priorities, deciding between rent and a winter coat. Between food on the table and cough medicine. The words came now like a flood kept at bay for too long, finally overflowing. There were nights when I didn't even have the strength to cry. Nights when I held Maisie, who was hungry, and sang her to sleep because I had nothing to feed her. Winters when the heat broke and we slept in coats under every blanket we had. Times when I thought I couldn't do it anymore. Her voice wavered and she took a deep breath, holding back tears that threatened to fall. And through all that, I never asked for help, never called anyone, never reached out to old friends or acquaintances. Why? Nolan asked, his own voice thick with emotion. Nora raised her eyes to him, and he saw a mix of old pain and a strength he could hardly comprehend. I never asked for help because I didn't think anyone would come. Those words hit Nolan like a blow to the chest. He saw in her eyes all those lonely nights, the countless days of struggle, the moments she had to be strong because there was no one else. I would have come, he said, realizing how hollow it sounded after all that time. You were building your empire, she replied, not accusing him, just stating a fact. Becoming Nolan Carter, CEO of Carter Innovations. I read your name in business magazines, knew you were doing all you ever dreamed of. But at what cost? He murmured, more to himself than to her. I built a company, made millions, and in the end, I have an empty apartment and not even a dog waiting when I come home. A slight smile touched Nora's lips. Maisie mentioned you should get a dog. She's very wise for a 5-year-old. Almost 6, Nora corrected. And yes, she is. She had to grow up way too fast. They fell silent for a moment, each absorbing the truth that had finally been spoken. Maybe, Nolan said at last, I was never someone people ask for help. Nora looked at him, surprised by his raw honesty. What do you mean? My entire adult life has been about success, Nora. Achievements, acquisitions, the next big deal. I've become someone people fear in meetings, not someone they call when they're in trouble. He looked down at his own hands, surprisingly empty for someone who had spent his life trying to hold on to more and more. When I found Maisie on that street, wearing the necklace I made for you, it was like time stopped. Like the universe was giving me a second chance to be the person I promised I'd be. The words lingered between them, heavy with meaning. They weren't empty promises or grand declarations, they were simple truths, finally acknowledged. And who is that person? Nora asked softly. Someone worth calling when you need help, Nolan replied. Someone who shows up. Nora nodded slowly, as if accepting not just his words, but the moment they were sharing. There, in that small, simple living room, with Maisie's drawings on the fridge and faded curtains filtering the afternoon light, something shifted between them, not with grand gestures or lavish promises, but with simple truth finally spoken. Because truth brings people closer, more than any plan could. Nora's follow-up appointment was at 9 in the morning. Nolan arrived at 8:30, parking in front of the small brick building. He already knew his way to the 3rd floor, knew which steps creaked the loudest on the wooden staircase. Maisie opened the door before he even knocked, as if she had been waiting. Hi, she said, a broad smile lighting up her face. Good morning, miss, Nolan responded, bowing playfully, which made Maisie giggle. Mom's getting ready, she informed, pulling him by the hand into the apartment, but she's taking forever. Nolan stepped inside, noticing the change in the atmosphere. It wasn't just a small, clean apartment anymore. It was a home he was beginning to know. The couch where Nora rested in the afternoons, the kitchen table where Maisie drew while he cooked dinner, the books on the shelf that he'd discovered were Nora's favorites from their teenage years. "Is she feeling okay?" he asked in a quieter voice. Maisie made a face and shook her head. "She threw up again this morning, and there's a red patch on her arm that's itchy." Nolan frowned. Adjusting lupus medication had proven more complicated than the doctor initially expected. It had been 2 weeks since Nora was discharged, and they were still searching for the right balance between controlling the disease and minimizing side effects. The bedroom door opened, and Nora emerged, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt. She looked pale, with noticeable dark circles under her eyes, but had made an effort to look better. Her hair was carefully combed, a touch of blush on her cheeks, attempting to mask the pallor. "Good morning," she said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sorry it took me so long." "No rush," Nolan said, noticing how she leaned slightly against the wall. "We've got time." "I'm ready," Maisie announced, already wearing her backpack. Returning to school had been a topic of debate between the adults over the last week. Nora insisted Maisie needed to go back, while Nolan offered to hire a temporary tutor so Maisie could stay closer to her mom. In the end, they reached a compromise. Maisie would go to school in the morning, and Nolan would pick her up after lunch so they could visit Nora, who still wasn't cleared to work. "Let's go then," Nora said, picking up her purse. She took 2 steps and stumbled slightly. Nolan was at her side in an instant, slipping an arm around her waist, firm but gentle. "You okay?" "Just dizzy," she replied, trying to pull away. "It'll pass." But Nolan didn't let go. "Let me help you," he said softly, more statement than question. For a moment, Nora resisted, her body rigid against his. Then slowly, like ice melting, she allowed herself to lean on him. "Thank you," she murmured. Maisie watched with alert eyes, her little forehead creased in worry. "Will Mum get better today?" she asked as they descended the stairs, Nora still leaning on Nolan. "We'll see what the doctor says," Nolan answered honestly. "Sometimes it takes a while to find the right medicine." In the car, Maisie chattered about school. Her friend Zoe with a pet hamster, her teacher with polka-dot glasses. Her boundless energy seemed to fill the space, as if trying to compensate for her mother's weary silence. They dropped Maisie off at school first. Nora insisted on getting out of the car to walk her daughter to the gate, despite Nolan's protests. She knelt down, ignoring the obvious pain, and hugged Maisie tightly. "Have a great day, my love," she said, adjusting the girl's shirt collar. "Nolan will pick you up after lunch." "Promise you'll be home when I get back?" Maisie asked, her eyes revealing a familiar, old fear. Nora cupped her daughter's face with both hands. "I promise. I'm just going to the doctor and then back home. I'll be waiting for you." Maisie nodded, gave her mom a kiss on the cheek, and ran to join the other kids in the schoolyard. Back in the car, Nora let out a long, tired sigh, as if she had used all her energy in that brief moment. "She's been like that since her father left," Nora explained without prompting. "Always afraid I'll vanish too. It must be hard on her." "And on me," Nora admitted, watching the city pass by through the window as the car pulled away. "Knowing that, no matter how often I promise, she'll always have that doubt." They arrived at Dr. Bennett's office, the rheumatologist Nolan had hired to treat Nora. The waiting room was elegant and comfortable, but Nora looked out of place amid the expensive decor magazines and perfectly placed ornamental plants. "All of this is too much, Nolan," she murmured while they waited. "I could just go to a regular clinic." "Dr. Bennett is the best lupus specialist in the city," Nolan replied. "You deserve the best care." Nora was about to protest when the nurse called her name. The appointment lasted almost an hour. Nolan waited patiently, responding to emails on his phone, occasionally glancing at the closed door. When it finally opened, Dr. Bennett stepped out first, signaling for Nolan to come closer. "We need to adjust her medication," the doctor explained quietly. The corticosteroids are causing significant side effects, and the immunosuppressant therapy hasn't reached the ideal balance yet. What does that mean in practice? Nolan asked. A few more weeks of tweaks, possibly more discomfort before it improves. Lupus is complicated, especially at the early stages of treatment. Nolan nodded, processing the information. And work? I don't recommend she go back now, the doctor said. At least another 2 weeks of rest. Nora emerged at that moment, a new prescription in hand, resignation on her face. She had clearly overheard some of the conversation. Another 2 weeks, she said, more statement than question. Just to be cautious, Dr. Bennett confirmed. We need to find the right balance of medications before you resume a full routine. On the way back to the apartment, Nora remained silent, staring out the window. Only when they were climbing the building's stairs did she finally speak. I can't stay off work that long, Nolan. The bills don't stop. Don't worry about that now, he replied, helping her up the last few steps. You heard the doctor. You need to rest. Easy for you to say when you have a bank account like yours, she said, a touch of bitterness in her voice. I have responsibilities. Maisie, rent, the bills. Nolan opened the apartment door and waited for her to enter before responding. I told you I'd take care of you, and I am. Nora turned to face him, a storm in her eyes. For how long, Nolan? Until you get tired? Until the novelty wears off? Until your company needs you more than we do? The question lingered between them, charged with fear and unspoken doubts. Is that what you think of me? He finally asked, his voice calm but hurt. Nora sighed, the energy of her brief anger melting away to reveal only exhaustion. I don't know what to think. You showed up out of nowhere after 14 years, paying medical bills, taking care of my daughter, helping me with everything. It's a lot to process. She sat on the couch, looking suddenly drained. I don't want to be a burden, Nolan. I don't want you to be here out of pity or guilt. Nolan sat beside her, not too close, but near enough that she felt his presence. It's not pity or guilt, he said simply. It's a choice. She looked at him, confused. What do you mean? I spent 14 years doing what I thought I had to do, building a company, making money, chasing success, and during all that time, there was a void nothing ever filled. He paused, choosing his words carefully. You're the reason I came back, Nora. Not to take care of you or make up for lost time, but because when I saw Maisie on that street, when I found you on this couch, I realized that for the first time in years, I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Nora's eyes filled with tears she struggled to hold back. What if I never fully recover? What if the lupus gets worse? What if I'm a burden forever? Then I'll be here forever, Nolan replied. It's not an empty promise, Nora. It's a choice I make every day when I wake up. She closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to absorb the weight of those words. I can't give you anything in return, she whispered. I'm not asking for anything. The silence between them felt different now. No longer weighted by unspoken words or unanswered questions, it was a comfortable quiet, like old friends who don't need to fill every moment with noise. The morning slipped by. Nolan worked on his laptop at the kitchen table, while Nora rested on the couch, occasionally commenting on the book she was reading or an email he had to answer. It was a simple domesticity, with no pretensions or expectations, just presence, not promise. Shortly after noon, Nolan got ready to pick Maisie up from school. Want me to bring something for lunch? He asked, grabbing his car keys. Something light, Nora answered. My stomach's still sensitive from the meds. He nodded and started out. Nolan, she called, and when he turned featured, there was something new in her eyes. Not gratitude or suspicion, but a kind of tentative peace, like the start of something she couldn't yet name. Thank you. At school, Maisie was waiting impatiently in the yard, hopping from one foot to the other when she saw Nolan's car. She ran to him, her backpack bouncing on her small shoulders. Is Mom okay? She asked before even saying hello. She's waiting for us at home, Nolan replied, taking her backpack. The doctor gave her new medicine that should help her feel better. On the drive back, Maisie was unusually quiet, staring out the window with a thoughtful expression far too mature for her face. "Everything okay?" Nolan asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. Maisie hesitated, fiddling with the buttons on her coat. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you going to leave us like Dad did?" Her question struck Nolan like a fist to the gut. It was so direct, so raw in its simplicity, so laden with old pain. He pulled the car to a stop at the next red light and turned to look at her in the back seat. "Maisie, look at me," he said softly. Her big, serious eyes met his, waiting for an answer she'd heard before and hadn't believed. "I choose to stay," Nolan said, each word clear and firm. "And I stay. That's the difference between me and your dad. He chose to leave. I choose to stay every day." Maisie kept watching him, as though searching for any sign of deceit. "Even when Mom gets sick, especially when she gets sick, even if I make a mess, even if you color all the walls with markers." That made her smile a little. "I'd never do that." "Good to know." The light turned green, and Nolan started driving again. Maisie stayed pensive in the back seat. "Pinky promise?" she finally asked. Nolan smiled, remembering the childhood ritual he and Nora had used. "When we get home," he promised. At the apartment, Maisie ran to hug her mom, while Nolan brought in the lunch they had picked up on the way. They ate together at the small kitchen table, Maisie talking about school, Nora smiling despite her visible fatigue, Nolan simply present, watching them both. After lunch, when Nora went to rest a little, Maisie tugged Nolan to the corner of the living room. "You promised," she reminded him, holding out her pinky. Nolan smiled and hooked his pinky around hers, so tiny compared to his. "I, Nolan Carter, promise I'll stay. I won't leave. I'll be here for you and your mom, on good days and bad." Maisie nodded solemnly, the promise sealed with that old ritual. And there, in that small apartment, with a pinky promise vow, something fundamental changed. It wasn't just Nolan making a promise. It was Maisie deciding to believe it. She believed him for the first time. Dr. Bennett's decision to admit Nora again came as a shock. What should have been a simple medication adjustment turned into a more serious complication when she fainted during her routine checkup. "Just to be safe," the doctor explained as the staff prepared her hospital room, "I want to closely monitor this reaction to the immunosuppressants, 3 or 4 days at most." Nolan stood by the window of the hospital room, watching while Nora drifted off under the effects of the medication. Maisie stood beside him, clutching Mr. Hop so tightly her knuckles went white, her eyes fixed on her mother. "She'll wake up, right?" the girl asked, her voice small in the silent room. "Of course she will," Nolan replied, placing an arm around her shoulders. "She's just resting so the medicine can work better." Maisie nodded, accepting his explanation, but she didn't take her eyes off her mother's pale face. "Where are we going to sleep?" The question caught Nolan off guard. He hadn't considered it yet, his mind still reeling from Nora's sudden admission. "We can stay at my apartment again," he suggested. "Or, if you'd rather, we can stay at your place." Maisie thought it over. "Our house," she decided. "So Mom knows where to find us when she comes back." The child's reasoning touched Nolan deeply. Even now, her concern was that her mother should be able to find them, as if she feared that if Nora returned, they'd have vanished too. "Our house it is," he agreed. For 2 days, they fell into a routine. In the morning, Nolan dropped Maisie at school. Then he went to the hospital, where he worked on his laptop beside Nora's bed, stopping only when she woke briefly. In the afternoon, he picked Maisie up, and they visited Nora together. On the second night, after Maisie finally fell asleep in her own room, Nolan wandered around the small apartment, noticing things he hadn't before. Peeling paint on the bathroom ceiling, a worn kitchen floor with stains that wouldn't come out, a living room window that didn't fully close, letting in the cold wind, the ancient heater that made alarming noises when turned on. He sat on the threadbare sofa, looking around, imagining how Nora and Maisie had lived here all these years, fighting off the cold in winter, enduring the heat in summer, making the best of what they had. Nolan took out his phone and started making calls. The next morning, after dropping Maisie at school, he didn't go straight to the hospital. Instead, he went to Carter Innovations, where he gathered his trusted team. "I need 3 days," he told Lisa, his executive assistant for over 5 years. "Cancel everything that can't be postponed or delegated." Lisa, used to impossible requests, merely raised an eyebrow. "Including the Tokyo teleconference." "Especially the Tokyo teleconference. Marcus can handle it." "And if they ask where you are?" Nolan considered for a moment. "Tell them I'm on a personal project." 2 hours later, Nolan was back at Nora's apartment, but not alone. A team of 10 people was with him: painters, electricians, plumbers, carpenters. A truck from a furniture store parked right behind them. "We have 3 days, Nolan explained to the supervisor, handing him floor plans and project sketches he had stayed up all night preparing. "I want everything finished by the time they return." The man studied the drawings, nodding. "We can do it, Mr. Carter. But it'll be tight. Make it happen." At the hospital, Nora still slept most of the time, the drugs keeping her sedated while her body adjusted to the new treatment. During her brief periods of wakefulness, Nolan stayed by her side, talking about Maisie's school day, omitting any mention of the ongoing project at the apartment. "How's home?" Nora asked during one of those lucid moments. "All under control," Nolan answered, technically not lying. "Maisie is fine, sleeping in her room. I'm on the couch." Nora gave a faint smile. "That couch is awful for sleeping." "I've slept in worse places," he assured her, remembering college nights spent in engineering labs finishing projects. "Thank you for taking care of her," Nora murmured, her eyes heavy once more. "For taking care of us." Nolan held her hand as she drifted back to sleep, feeling a tightness in his throat he couldn't quite explain. Back at the apartment, the renovation was in full swing. Walls were being sanded, old furniture removed, new plumbing installed. Nolan moved through the chaos, checking progress. In Maisie's room, painters had already started applying a soft yellow hue he had chosen, keeping the same color scheme she had before, just fresher, brighter. He was clear in his instructions: no drastic changes that would make the space unrecognizable. Only improvements, comfort, safety. "Mr. Carter," called one of the carpenters, "where do you want these shelves?" Nolan approached him, examining the solid wooden shelves he had personally selected. "In the main bedroom, by the window. They need to be strong enough to hold a lot of books." The man nodded and left while Nolan continued his inspection. The kitchen was undergoing a more significant transformation. The old cabinets were being replaced, the stove swapped for a more efficient model, and the small refrigerator replaced with a family-sized one. But he insisted on keeping the old wooden table, just restored. That table was where Maisie drew, where Nora had likely spent countless meals with her daughter. Some things didn't need replacing, they just needed care. In the living room, the old sofa had been removed, replaced with a new one that was more comfortable but looked similar. The old TV remained, now resting on a new stand that matched the decor. With every step, Nolan made sure to preserve the essence of what made the place home to Nora and Maisie. He wasn't creating a new environment, he was simply giving the existing one the conditions it deserved. On the second day of the renovation, an accidental discovery changed part of the plan. "Mr. Carter," called one of the painters, holding a folder he'd found behind a cabinet being removed. "I found this. Looks important." Nolan opened the folder carefully. Inside were dozens of drawings, far from Maisie's childish scribbles. These were detailed studies, charcoal sketches, delicate watercolors, landscapes, portraits, still lifes, all signed with the initials N.L. Nora Lane. Then he remembered how Nora used to carry a sketchbook in her teens, how her art teachers said she had real talent, how she dreamed of studying art before life took another turn. Nolan called the site supervisor. "Change of plans," he said, pointing to the small space that was supposed to be a pantry. "I want this room turned into a studio." The man looked confused. "A studio?" "An art space, shelves for materials, a large table by the window to make the most of natural light. "I want special lighting installed here and here," he said, marking spots on the plan, modifying the original design. "And we need a proper easel, the best you can find." The supervisor nodded, taking notes. "May I ask why?" Nolan looked again at the drawings in the folder. "Because some dreams deserve a second chance." By the third day, the work pace was frantic. Crews worked around the clock, painting, installing, adjusting. Nolan barely slept, grabbing a few hours on the floor of Maisie's room, in between progress checks. Meanwhile, at the hospital, there was good news. Dr. Bennett was pleased with Nora's response to the new treatment. "She can go home tomorrow," he said. "The tests show significant improvement. Of course, she'll need regular follow-ups, but I'm optimistic." "Great," Nolan replied, trying to hide his relief. "Right on schedule." Maisie, sitting next to her mother's hospital bed, looked at Nolan knowingly. He'd explained the renovation project to her the night before, making her promise it would be their secret. "A surprise present for when Mom comes home," he had said. Maisie had nodded solemnly. "Will she like it?" she asked, worried. "I hope so," Nolan replied honestly. "We're not changing your house, just making it more comfortable." "What about the secret room?" Maisie asked, referring to the studio. "Especially the secret room." Now here, while Nora slept more peacefully than she had in days, Nolan and Maisie exchanged conspiratorial glances and whispered updates. On the next morning, the apartment was unrecognizable, and yet, somehow, comfortingly familiar. Everything was in its place, only better, warmer, safer, more inviting. The wooden floor had been restored, not replaced. The walls had colors similar to the originals, but fresher, brighter. The layout was the same, simply optimized. The air circulated differently now, thanks to the new heating and AC system discreetly installed without compromising the original structure. Nolan walked through the rooms, checking every detail. In Maisie's bedroom, new shelves already held her books and toys. In Nora's room, a new bed with an orthopedic mattress was dressed with the same floral bedspreads, freshly washed and pressed. The kitchen cabinets were stocked with food. In the living room, a reading chair occupied the corner by the window, where Nolan had seen Nora sitting, watching the street below. And in the small studio, everything was ready. High-quality art supplies filled the shelves: brushes, paints, canvases, paper. A top-notch wooden easel stood by the window. On one wall, there was a special shelf displaying the drawings Nolan had found, each framed with simple elegance. It wasn't ostentatious, it wasn't charity. It was respect for what that space meant to both of them. It was an understanding that a home isn't measured by the cost of furniture, but by the comfort it offers those who live there. It wasn't a gift, it was a home. "It's time," Nolan said to the crew, finishing the last details. "They'll be here in an hour." When everything was done and the workers had left, Nolan allowed himself a moment of doubt. Had he gone too far? Had he crossed some invisible line? Would Nora see it as an insult, a criticism of what she had managed to build on her own? There was no time to reconsider. The car was already on its way from the hospital, bringing Nora home. Maisie was practically bouncing with excitement when they entered the building. "Remember, it's a surprise," Nolan whispered as they climbed the stairs. "Let your mum notice things on her own." Nora moved slowly, still regaining her strength. She looked better than she had in days, but the hospital stay had taken its toll. At the apartment door, she fished out her keys. "Let me do it," Maisie offered, taking the keys and unlocking with some difficulty, her small hands trembling with anticipation. The door opened, and Nora stepped in, coming to an abrupt stop. The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Nora stood perfectly still, her eyes moving slowly around the living room, taking in every detail, every change. Her hand rose to cover her mouth, but she made no sound. Maisie glanced at Nolan, worry replacing her earlier excitement. "Mom?" she finally asked. "Do you like it?" Nora turned to Maisie, then to Nolan, tears brimming in her eyes. "You did this?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Nolan did," Maisie answered quickly. "While you were asleep in the hospital. I just helped pick the colors." Nora took a few hesitant steps into the living room, touching the new couch, feeling the texture of the curtains, running her hand along the refinished coffee table. "It's, the same place," she finally said. "But better," Maisie completed. Nolan remained silent, letting them take in the moment. Maisie took her mother's hand, tugging gently. "Come see my room, and yours. Everything's different, but the same." She led Nora through the rooms, pointing out each detail with a child's exuberance. The new closet with the same old clothes neatly arranged, the renovated bathroom with the same fish-patterned shower curtain Maisie loved, the kitchen with modern appliances, but the same familiar layout Nora had known for years. When they reached what used to be the pantry, Maisie paused, looking at Nolan expectantly. "This is special," he said, coming closer. "Just for you, Nora." He opened the door, revealing the small studio. Natural light now poured in through a widened window, illuminating the easel, the shelves of supplies, the framed drawings. Nora stepped inside slowly, as if entering a dream. Her fingers grazed the brushes, the paints, the high-quality paper. Her eyes roamed over the drawings she'd made years ago, now framed with quiet admiration. "How did you know?" she whispered. "We found your drawings," Nolan explained. "They're amazing, Nora. You always had talent." She touched one of the framed pieces, a portrait of baby Maisie, sleeping. "I haven't drawn in years," she confessed. "I didn't have time, or energy, or hope," Nolan suggested gently. She nodded, unable to speak. Maisie wrapped her arms around her mother's waist. "Now you can draw again, and I can draw with you." Nora knelt, hugging her daughter tightly, tears finally spilling freely. "Thank you, my love." Over Maisie's shoulder, her eyes met Nolan's. He saw so many emotions there that he couldn't decipher them all. Gratitude, yes, but something deeper as well, something he wasn't yet ready to name. "Nolan," she began, but words seemed insufficient. "It's not a gift," he said, knowing how she felt. "It's what you both deserve. It's what this place should have always been." That night, after Maisie fell asleep, worn out by all the excitement, Nora and Nolan sat at the kitchen table for dinner. He'd made something simple, homemade soup and fresh bread, mindful of Dr. Bennett's dietary advice. The gentle light of the new hanging lamp over the table created a small circle of intimacy around them. "You didn't have to do all this," Nora said, breaking the silence. "I wanted to," Nolan replied simply. "It must have cost a fortune." "Money is the easiest part, Nora." She watched him, studying his face. "Why?" "Because you deserve a place where you can feel safe, comfortable, where the heater works in winter and the windows close properly, where there's room for Maisie's drawings and yours too." He paused, glancing around the renewed kitchen, thinking of the apartment as a whole, every corner lovingly considered. "There's room here for everyone to grow," he finally said. Nora's face lit up with a smile of recognition. "You remember that?" she asked, genuine surprise in her voice. "It's what you used to say when we played," Nolan recalled, smiling too. "When we built those sheet forts on your porch." Nora chuckled softly at the vivid memory. "A place where everyone can grow," she repeated. "That was our motto, our promise." She reached out across the table, touching his hand gently. "I always knew you'd go far," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I followed each step from afar, always rooting for you." Nolan felt warmth expand in his chest. "You kept track?" "Of course," she said. "The articles in the business magazines. The headlines about the young tech prodigy," she smiled. "I clipped every one of them." "You kept them?" Nolan asked, genuinely surprised. Nora nodded. "They're in a box in the closet. I wanted Maisie to know about you, even if we never met again." Their hands remained joined on the table, a simple touch saying more than any elaborate speech. "I should have come back sooner," Nolan confessed. "And I should have reached out when I needed you," Nora replied. "I think we both have regrets. But we're here now." "Yes," Nora agreed, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. "We're here now." In that simple moment at a freshly renewed kitchen table, under the soft light that created a world just for them, it became clear. She hadn't forgotten, neither had he. Time had passed, life had taken unexpected turns, but the bond between them remained, transformed, matured, yet intact, like an invisible thread that, despite everything, still tied them together. The seasons changed, and with them the intertwined lives of Nolan, Nora, and Maisie. December brought its piercing cold, but the renovated apartment stayed warm and welcoming. The heater ran quietly, and the newly sealed windows kept out the wind. Inside, something equally important was blossoming. A routine. "One more?" Maisie asked every morning, watching Nolan flip another pancake in the frying pan. "One more and you'll turn into a pancake," he teased, adding another to her already full plate. Nora, sipping tea, observed with a smile. Her hair, once always in a practical ponytail, now fell loosely over her shoulders. Some tension had left her posture. A shadow no longer lurked in her eyes. "Don't encourage her," she said, feigning sternness. "She's already had 3. "I'm a growing girl," Maisie declared with the seriousness of a newly turned 6-year-old. These mornings became a precious part of their routine. Nolan no longer slept at the apartment. He had returned to his penthouse once Nora recovered. But every morning before work, he arrived with fresh ingredients for breakfast. Sometimes he stayed for dinner. On weekends, they spent the entire day together. They didn't label what they were building, it just was comfortable, safe, real. Dr. Bennett had reduced Nora's checkups to once a month. The lupus was under control, medication balanced. She still had bad days, days of extreme fatigue, joint pain, an exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fully cure. But those days were fewer and farther apart. Nora had returned to work part-time at the local library. Afternoons were devoted to her art studio, where her dormant talent woke once more. First with tentative sketches, then delicate watercolors, and now vibrant oil paintings capturing the apartment's light. Maisie's smile, the city view from the window. Nolan had also changed his routine. He delegated more at the company, turned down late meetings, kept his mornings free for pancakes and his Friday afternoons to pick Maisie up from school. It wasn't perfect. Nothing real is. There were occasional disagreements, minor frustrations, necessary adjustments. Nora sometimes pulled back, years of forced independence creating walls that gradually crumbled. Nolan sometimes got lost in work projects. Maisie had nightmares, waking up crying for people who were no longer there. But those moments didn't define what they had built. They were just part of a larger whole, shadows making the light more cherished. On a cold January afternoon, Nora was painting in the studio while Maisie worked on homework at the kitchen table under Nolan's supervision. "I don't get why I have to learn fractions," Maisie complained. "I'll never use them." "Says the girl who insists on splitting her pancakes in half to have a more," Nolan teased. "That's different. It's about food. Math is everywhere," Nolan explained. "When your mom paints, she uses proportions. When I design a device, I use calculations. And when you split pancakes—" "Okay, got it," Maisie interrupted with a sigh, but a small smile betrayed her renewed interest. At the studio door, Nora watched silently, paintbrush in hand. There was something deeply moving about the scene. Nolan leaning over homework, patiently explaining, Maisie frowning in concentration. Later, after Maisie was asleep, Nora invited Nolan for tea on the tiny enclosed balcony. It was just big enough for 2 chairs, protected by a cover and warmed by a small space heater. "She really likes you," Nora said. "More than she's ever liked anyone besides me." Nolan nodded, feeling the weight of that trust. "She's amazing, smart, strong, brave, like her mom." Nora smiled, looking into her teacup. "You know, she asked if she could call you Dad." That caught Nolan off guard. Something in his chest tightened, an emotion he couldn't name. "What did you tell her?" "I said she needed to ask you first, and that these things take time." Nolan went quiet, absorbing the meaning of her words. What do you want, Nora? Truly, not just for Maisie, but for you. She lifted her eyes to meet his, showing a vulnerability she rarely displayed. Thank you for coming back, she whispered. For letting me find you again. It wasn't exactly an answer to his question, but somehow it said everything. Thank you for still knowing who I was, Nolan replied, even when I'd forgotten. Their hands met over the small table between the chairs. It wasn't a dramatic or passionate gesture, just comfortable, familiar, like returning home after a long journey. It was love. But a love as shelter, not as a grand promise. Weeks turned into months. February gave way to March, which yielded to April. The biting cold receded, and the first signs of spring emerged. One Saturday afternoon, while Maisie was at a birthday party, Nora finished her newest painting. It was different, a more abstract portrayal of an amber star, its rays radiating across the canvas in warm gold and brown tones. When Nolan arrived for dinner, she showed it to him hesitantly. It's beautiful, he said, clearly impressed. It looks like it's really glowing. It's for you. For your apartment. Nolan carefully touched the canvas, feeling the texture of the paint. I'm not sure I want to take it, he admitted. It feels like it belongs here. Nora smiled, understanding what he didn't say. The next morning, they hung the painting in the living room above the sofa. Next to it, on a shelf, sat the amber star necklace that Maisie had returned to her mother when she realized how important it was. And, framed simply, the old photo of two teenagers sitting by a lake. But there was something new on the wall. A recent photo taken at Maisie's birthday party. Nora, Nolan, and Maisie all smiling at the camera. Not forced or posed smiles, but genuine expressions of happiness. Their hands intertwined, Maisie in the middle, holding each adult's hand, forming an unbreakable human chain. Maisie noticed the new addition when she got home from school. Hey, that's us, she exclaimed, running over for a closer look. You like it? Nora asked. Yeah. Maisie studied the image. We look happy. We were, Nolan said from the couch, finishing some emails before dinner. We are. Maisie glanced from the photo to the two adults, then back again. Her face took on that thoughtful look that seemed too big for her 6-year-old features. Are we going to stay like that forever? She finally asked, her question hanging in the air like a delicate soap bubble, fragile yet filled with possibility. Nora and Nolan exchanged a glance. It wasn't a simple question, and both knew it. Forever is a frightening concept for adults who've seen life's complexities and uncertainty. But for a child who had tasted abandonment, who carried the fear of loss like a constant shadow, it was the most important question in the world. Nolan closed his laptop and walked over, kneeling down to Maisie's eye level. For as long as you want, he answered with a simplicity that carried the weight of a true promise. Not a guarantee of eternal perfection, but a commitment to be there, to choose it over and over, to stay even when it got tough. Maisie considered his response, then nodded, satisfied. For her, at that moment, it was enough. It was everything. That night, they ate dinner together at the little kitchen table. Maisie recounted stories from school, acting them out with dramatic gestures. Nora laughed, her face lit up in a way that made her look younger, freer. Nolan watched them both, feeling that familiar sense that he was exactly where he needed to be. After dinner, they watched a movie in the living room, all three squeezed onto the couch. Maisie fell asleep between them, head on her mother's lap, her bare feet resting on Nolan's leg. On the wall, the photo of the three of them seemed to watch over the scene with silent approval. 3 figures framed and 3 people on the couch, past and present perfectly aligned like stars in a finally complete constellation. There, in that simple but welcoming apartment, lay the truth they had found together. Sometimes home isn't a place, but people. That family isn't just about blood, but about choosing each other every day. That the truest love doesn't come with grand declarations, but with a steady presence in life's little routines. And this time, no one left. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.